I'm Charlie Jardino, Clerk of Court of St. Landry Parish. I've been in this job since 1992, and it's been my pleasure to serve the people of St. Landry Parish as their clerk. One of the favorite parts of my job is the archives and the responsibilities and the opportunities that go along with taking care of the archives of such an old parish. We were part of Imperial St. Landry Parish when it was created. And so we have records that go way back to the 1700s. Matter of fact, this courthouse was completed in 1941, but the first courthouse was built here in about 1920, and I'm sorry, 1837. There was also a structure here in 1806. 1820, it burned down, and it burned down again in 1939. That's when the present courthouse was built. Fortunately, the records were kept in an outbuilding and they weren't lost. So we have records all the way back to the colonial period. The first clerk here was Judge Lee, and he served as a clerk from 1805 to 1807. He became the parish probate judge from 1807 and he served until 1842. Our colonial records cover a period of 1764 to 1803. They're on microfilm here and available on microfilm, and they're also at the state archives. The notarial records span the time period of 1820 to 1850, and the first parish recorder was here in 1845. We have records that are imaged and indexed in various periods from the 1800s to present, and in mid 2015 we should have a constant record that's imaged and indexed and available online from 1800 to the present day. We're pretty proud of that, and it should be completed early next year. I'd like to introduce our archivist, a former archivist who's retired now, Mr. Keith Fontenot, and he can expand on what I've told you about our records here in St. Landry Parish. Thank you.
African Americans especially should come in and go to your local courthouses and try to trace your ancestry. It's not that easy because sometimes you're in 1865 and you know, there's no other records. There's the black registries in the Catholic Church and Reverend Hebert's books in volume 33. However, this is only a sampling of what is available. In a lot of cases, say for instance, the Zachary family, maybe the individual who was freed in 1865, he decides to use Zachary as his surname. And that's the beginning of a family line there. With the free people of color, you can go much further back. Say with the Donatos, Martin Donata was the son of Donato Bello, who was originally from Naples, Italy, and was a major in the Louisiana militia. So it was a common practice where you had white men that would take up with women of color or race, mixed race, and live in concubinage too. Case in point is Arnaud Ramon and Françoise Panier. They were living northeast of Eunice, and Ramon is here in the 18th century. He's buying land from Jean Tesson, and he ultimately emancipates her, and then she files suit that she wants to have also her children emancipated. So you do find emancipation documents. In the 1820s, it's the district court and also the parish court that would be granting emancipations to these individuals. The process basically entailed the master petitioning the court for the emancipation to take place. In addition, the court would have this slave advertised for 30 days. If anybody had any outstanding debts against the master, they would have to come forward and present their case. If there was no problems with creditors, the court would grant an authorization to the master. Then in turn, the master would emancipate the slave. Normally, it was around the age of 30 that a lot of these emancipations took place. Also, you will see emancipations in wills where servants or, slaves are given their freedom by the master upon his or her death. Later on, you can also see a emancipation sale where the slave gives the master so many dollars to purchase their freedom, and then they are given the emancipation through a bill of sale. This is much more prevalent in the 1850s. The police jury also at one time is giving emancipations and that. What's also interesting is the fact that it's the individual or the state legislature that could emancipate. The district court's role basically was to reaffirm the status of the individual. In 1998, myself with Claude, we did a paper for the Louisiana Journal entitled Libre vers non, case studies of freedom cases in St. Landry Parish. What is of interest is that you had some individuals who were free living in Maryland, Kentucky, maybe southern Pennsylvania, and they are kidnapped and sold back into slavery, and in time they come forward to the district court to have their status affirmed. Again, there was due process that you had white attorneys like Valentine King who would take these cases. He went to New England, to New York, to gather information concerning certain individuals to prove that they were free. Now the question remains, who was paying for this? Again, it could have been other free people of color who were paying these attorneys to, follow a due process to reaffirm the person's status as a freed person. You also have a legislative act in 1830 that really restricts the immigration of free people of color from other states coming into Louisiana. You will find that basically these freed people were local, they stayed in the state, and it was also incumbent upon the former master to provide for the health and well-being of this individual if they became sick or infirm, not to pose a burden upon the parish. So you will find emancipation records, you will find slave records, you will find a host of other records that are important, sales of brands, cattle, livestock. Also, you have the issue of transportation. It's not till 1826 that the first steamboat, the Dolphin, comes from New Orleans to Old Church Landing, or what is now Washington, Louisiana. There's a civil lawsuit whereby the Opelousas Steamboat Company managed to get a monopoly on all the goods to be shipped to New Orleans. The Dolphin was in violation of that, and it was ultimately determined that the state legislature could not grant monopolies to one company. What is of interest is that the actual charter for the Opelousas Steamboat Company was in, and is still in, a district court suit. But I would say the last few years, I filed it in the clerk's office in the conveyance record so people would have better access to this document, and also to the resolutions, and also who were the stockholders and how many stock that they held in the company. You will find protest affidavits whereby a flatboat or a steamboat hit a log, a snag. It took on water. Yes, we had a certain number of barrels of or hog heads of sugar, cotton, hide that we had to get on the bank, and some of this was, damaged by the water. There's also a case where Ormel Hinckley was a steamboat captain, and at Washington he had one slave named Luby, who apparently fell into the bayou and never came up, and to this day he's never been found. They just don't know what happened. But the steamboat business was very lucrative. They would ship cattle, sugar, hides, whatever other staples they had to New Orleans. But you go to the police jury minutes, conveyance records, you find there's always a problem with obstructions on the waterways, especially the Atchafalaya, that has these log jams, or rafts they are called, that have to constantly be cleaned out, or I guess they would put black gunpowder and blow up the obstructions and so forth, and trying to keep a channel open. So typically you would go from Washington to the mouth of the Bayou Catawba, where you had a sandbar known as the Little Devil, or Le Petit Diable, and you had problems in times of low water where the steamers would run aground upon the sandbar. There's a case in 1859 where Mr. Chrétien and Carrier sent cattle to New Orleans on a boat owned by the Offutt brothers. It turns out they ran aground, they unloaded the cattle, and the cattle were never found, and the Offutt brothers were ultimately responsible for the loss of, you know, the livestock, and had to give compensation to the owners. So you went down the Atchafalaya into Grand River through the Atchafalaya Basin, then into Bayou Plaquemine in Iberville Parish, and then into the Mississippi. Later on, they were also going up the Atchafalaya to where it ties in with the Red River, and then coming down that way too. But you had constant problems with obstructions, high water gave you problems, low water. There was a constant problem of mosquitoes and gnats and bed bugs. And, but it seems like if you read the manifest of these steamers, you will find what provisions they had, and they seem to have had a large amount of liquor to, I guess, to keep the passengers in a better frame of mind. The issue of slavery has always been very contentious. Again, it's a reprehensible institution. However, our ancestors had a different mindset. They considered, you know, slaves as chattel property. You could use a slave as collateral on a mortgage, and again, they did, in order to purchase land or to expand and so forth. And if you defaulted upon your note, the sheriff could come in, seize the slave, and sell it at a sheriff's sale. However, the records indicate that the institution was governed by due process. I think there were certain community standards that had to be upheld by the master, not to mistreat a slave or to go beyond the pale and so forth. There's a case where in the coroner's inquest in the 1860s, a gentleman in Washington apparently discharged a pistol and killed a 5-year-old slave. There was an inquest by the coroner to see what was going on. So you had due process. Why did Valentine King, a prominent white attorney, take these freedom cases? They were following the community standards that were in place at the time. Now, I would say to us, this seems to be a foreign concept that we really might not be able to put our heads around. But remember, these individuals were wearing a different set of rose-colored spectacles. They saw reality in a different way. And the main impetus for slavery was economic. You could also purchase insurance policies on slaves from companies in Philadelphia. If you had something dangerous to do on your plantation, you did not put a slave in a dangerous situation. You would hire an Irishman for 50 cents a day. If he got killed, by accident, that was his problem. So the amount of capital that is tied up in slavery is unbelievable. Again, it's driven by economics. The New England textile industry depended on it. The English textile industry depended upon cotton. If the boll weevil had come in 100 years earlier, if slavery had been economically unproductive, not worthwhile, the institution would have probably died of its own accord. But as long as there was a demand for cotton and economics, and then too, one might also consider how nature also can come in and throw a monkey wrench in this situation. Case in point, in 1815, you had a volcano that exploded in the East Indies, was named Toba. The year 1816 was a year without a summer. Thomas Jefferson suffered massive crop failures. Many people in New England did, which in turn led to a migration out of the Northeast towards the Southwest, towards Louisiana and that. So underneath, there could be several factors affecting the institution. Again, even in classical democracies of ancient Greece, Rome, it was usually men of landed wealth that were the voters that had franchises and so forth to run. Slaves, women were excluded from the political process. When Thomas Jefferson talks about we the people, he's probably referring to white males 21 years of age or older and owning at least 50 acres of land. So if you were not landed or of the gentry, they considered that you didn't have a stake in society. Again, you can go back to the U.S. Constitutional Convention in 1787, and there's the Three-Fifths Compromise about slaves and so forth. So you already have the seeds of discord that are really set at that time.